Nobody wanted the land. Not the neighboring farmers. Not the county. Not even the drainage contractors. 64 acres lay underwater for nearly 8 months every year. Spring floods filled the low basin. Summer left it muddy. Autumn covered it with reeds. Every attempt to drain it had failed. The county finally gave up. The auction notice described it in only 4 words. Permanently flood-prone farmland. The room laughed when Margaret Hale raised her bidding paddle. You serious? Dale Harper leaned toward another farmer. She's buying a swamp. 3 bids later, the property became hers. Outside the courthouse, Nathan unfolded the survey map. It really is low. Margaret nodded. The lowest land in the valley. Nathan looked across the distant floodplain. You know it'll flood again. She smiled. I hope it does. Nathan laughed. I should have expected that answer. The property bordered a slow-moving river. Decades earlier it had produced corn. Then flooding became more frequent. Levees shifted. Drainage ditches filled with sediment. Water refused to leave. Farmers spent fortunes pumping. The river simply returned every spring. Eventually, everyone quit trying. Nature reclaimed the fields. Cattails, rushes, willows, mud. Thousands of ducks stopped their every migration. Most people saw wasted farmland. Margaret saw something else entirely. When she was 15, Samuel Hale took her to visit an elderly rice farmer nearly 2 counties away. The old man wasn't using tractors that day. He stood ankle-deep in water watching hundreds of ducks swim through young rice. Margaret frowned. They're eating the crop. The old farmer laughed. No, they're helping it. She looked confused. How? Samuel smiled. Watch. For nearly an hour they stood quietly. The ducks ignored the rice. Instead they devoured insects. Snails. Young weeds. They stirred the mud with their feet. The old farmer folded his arms. They weed. They fertilize. They chase pests. Silence. And they never sent me a bill. Margaret never forgot that. Years later, she attended a regenerative agriculture conference. One presentation focused on traditional Asian rice farming. Photographs showed thousands of ducks swimming through flooded rice fields. Reduced herbicides. Fewer insects. Healthier soil. Lower costs. Margaret filled an entire notebook. She didn't copy the system. She wondered how it might fit her valley. Standing beside 64 flooded acres, she finally had her answer. The county heard almost immediately. Naturally. Saturday morning the diner bust. Dale Harper folded his newspaper. You hear what Margaret bought? Rick looked up. What now? The flooded county ground. Several farmers laughed. The swamp. Dale nodded. She's putting ducks on it. Someone nearly spilled his coffee. Ducks. Another rancher grinned. So now she's farming puddles? The room erupted. Margaret walked inside carrying fencing supplies. Dale waved. Morning. Morning. He smiled. So. She laughed. So. How's your lake? It's beautiful. More laughter. You planning to harvest cattails? Margaret smiled. No. What then? Rice. Silence. Then even louder laughter. Nobody believed rice belonged in their valley. Margaret simply carried her coffee outside. Some ideas sounded ridiculous before they looked obvious. The first months weren't spent planting anything. Instead, Margaret studied water. She walked every inch of the property, measured elevations, mapped natural inflows, recorded how quickly water entered and left after storms. Samuel always insisted. Water tells you exactly what it wants. If you stop arguing with it. She followed that advice. Instead of draining the flooded ground, she divided it. Low earthen berms gently shaped the property into several shallow paddies. Nothing dramatic. Just enough to guide water naturally. Nathan watched the excavator finish the final berm. That's all. Margaret nodded. We're letting gravity do the rest. Spring rains arrived. Every paddy filled slowly. Instead of one uncontrolled swamp, the land became a series of calm, shallow ponds. Exactly as Margaret hoped. Then came the ducks. Not a few dozen. Nearly 800 khaki Campbell and Welsh Harlequin ducks. The trailer doors opened. The flock rushed toward the water. Nathan laughed. I've never seen animals look happier. The ducks immediately began exploring. They dabbled through shallow water, pulled tiny weeds, chased insects, disturbed the soft mud. Everywhere they moved, life followed. Dragonflies hovered overhead. Frogs returned. Egrets appeared within days. The neighboring ranchers continued shaking their heads. Late one afternoon, Dale stopped beside the fence. I've got to admit. Margaret smiled. What? They're entertaining. She laughed. They're employed. The first rice planting began in late spring. Margaret chose an old, cold-tolerant variety adapted for shorter growing seasons. Most local farmers thought it would fail immediately. Nathan wasn't completely convinced either. You really think it'll grow here? Margaret looked across the flooded paddies. The ducks already believe it will. Young rice emerged several weeks later. Bright green rows stretched across the shallow water. The ducks swam constantly between them. Nathan watched nervously. They aren't eating it. Margaret smiled. They're busy. They spent nearly every hour hunting insects. Tiny snails disappeared almost completely. Weed seedlings vanished before they established themselves. The ducks' constant movement lightly stirred nutrients into the water without uprooting mature rice. The county extension agronomist visited in midsummer. He walked slowly through one paddy wearing borrowed hit boots. Ducks surrounded him curiously. He laughed. This is certainly different. Margaret smiled. That's one word. He knelt beside several rice plants. Healthy roots. Minimal weeds. Almost no insect damage. He looked surprised. I expected much worse. Instead, the rice looked remarkably vigorous. Nathan pointed toward another section. The ducks never stopped moving. The agronomist nodded. I can see that. He carefully collected soil samples, water samples, plant tissue, everything. Weeks later, he returned with laboratory results. Soil biology has improved dramatically. Margaret smiled. The ducks helped. So did keeping the ground flooded naturally. He looked thoughtful. I honestly didn't expect these numbers. Summer storms rolled through the valley. Neighboring cornfields flooded badly. Margaret's rice paddies quietly absorbed the water. Nothing washed away. Nothing drowned. The flood simply became part of the system. Nathan looked across the shimmering paddies. We stopped fighting the water. Margaret nodded. And started working with it. The ducks continued growing. Healthy. Strong. The rice headed beautifully. Golden seed heads slowly bent beneath their own weight. Even Dale Harper stopped laughing. At least out loud. One September evening he parked beside the gate. He stared across acres of golden rice shimmering above calm water filled with hundreds of busy ducks. Finally he spoke. I'll admit. Margaret smiled. What? It doesn't look like a swamp anymore. She laughed. No. What does it look like? Margaret looked across the valley. It looks like it finally found the right crop. Just then another truck pulled into the lane. The county agricultural commissioner climbed out carrying yield monitoring equipment. He spent nearly an hour walking through the paddies, examining the rice, watching the ducks work naturally between the rows. As the sun reflected across the flooded fields, he removed his hat and looked toward Margaret. Then he smiled. I've got a question. Margaret folded her arms. Go ahead. He looked across the golden rice stretching to the horizon. Do you realize these may already be the healthiest rice fields anyone has ever measured in this county? The county agricultural commissioner slowly lowered his clipboard. He looked across the flooded paddies glowing beneath the afternoon sun. Hundreds of ducks drifted quietly between rows of ripening rice. Then he looked at Margaret. Do you realize these may already be the healthiest rice fields anyone has ever measured in this county? Margaret smiled. I hope they were healthy. The commissioner laughed. They're much more than healthy. Nathan looked curious. What did the test show? The commissioner opened his folder. Soil organic matter is increasing. Beneficial insects are higher. Weed pressure is dramatically lower. He paused. And you've used almost no herbicides. Margaret looked across the ducks. They've been busy. Harvest arrived 2 weeks later. Most neighboring farmers expected disappointing yields. After all, nobody had successfully grown rice on that flooded ground before. The first combine entered the paddies on a cool October morning. Nathan watched the yield monitor carefully. The numbers climbed, then climbed again. He frowned. That can't be right. Margaret looked over. What? He pointed at the screen. It's producing better than the county average. The commissioner smiled. I checked the calibration twice. By sunset, the first paddy had exceeded every projection. Golden rice poured steadily into grain carts. The ducks waited patiently in the adjacent flooded section, already preparing for the next rotation. News spread before the last truck left the field. The county newspaper arrived the following morning. Its front-page photograph showed hundreds of ducks swimming through brilliant green rice. The headline stretched across the page. Flooded land becomes county's top rice field. Suddenly people stopped calling it a swamp. Restaurant buyers arrived first. They sampled the rice. The grains cooked evenly, held their shape, carried a clean, slightly nutty flavor. One chef smiled after tasting it. This doesn't taste ordinary. Margaret laughed. It grew in an extraordinary place. Within months, specialty grocery stores wanted it. Then gourmet restaurants. Soon the rice carried the Hale Ranch name on every bag. Nathan walked into the office carrying another stack of purchase requests. We've got another problem. Margaret looked up. The waiting list. He nodded. Longer than last year. She smiled. We'll grow another crop. The ducks continued proving their worth. Instead of spending weeks pulling weeds or spraying herbicides, they spent their days doing the work naturally. They hunted insects before pest populations exploded. They ate tinderweed seedlings. Their constant paddling lightly stirred nutrients into the shallow water. Even their manure returned fertility directly to the fields. The extension agronomist visited again during the second season. He knelt beside a rice plant. Healthy roots spread through rich mud. Almost no competing weeds surrounded it. He stood quietly. I've got to admit something. Margaret smiled. What? I came here expecting to explain why this wouldn't work. She laughed softly. And now, I've been taking notes all morning. The valley experienced unusually heavy spring flooding the following year. Many neighboring fields remained underwater too long. Corn never recovered. Soybeans had to be replanted. Margaret's land welcomed the flood. The paddies simply filled. The ducks swam happily through deeper water. The rice planting shifted only slightly. Nothing else changed. Nathan watched floodwaters spread across the property. It finally makes sense. Margaret smiled. What? We stopped treating water like an enemy. She nodded. We gave it the right job. One afternoon, Dale Harper drove onto the farm carrying a notebook. Margaret raised an eyebrow. No jokes today. He laughed. I've retired those. Together they walked along one of the levees. Hundreds of ducks quietly moved between emerald green rice. Dragonflies filled the air. Great egrets hunted frogs along the edges. The flooded fields looked alive. Dale finally stopped. I've been spending 30 years trying to keep water off my fields. He looked across the paddies. You spent 3 years figuring out how to use it. Margaret smiled. The water wasn't the problem. What was? We kept planting the wrong crop. That sentence stayed with him. By the 4th season, university researchers established permanent study plots across the ranch. They measured everything. Soil biology, bird populations, beneficial insects, water quality, methane emissions, even the fish living in the irrigation canals. Each year the same pattern appeared. Healthier soils, lower chemical inputs, greater biodiversity. The ducks had become far more than pest control. They had become part of the entire ecosystem. One graduate student asked Margaret, "When did you know this would succeed?" She smiled. "I didn't." The student looked surprised. "You didn't. I knew flooding wasn't going away." Silence. "So I stopped asking how to remove it." She looked across the paddies. "I started asking what wanted to grow there." The answer changed the ranch forever. Late one summer, the county announced plans for another abandoned floodplain. This time officials didn't advertise drainage projects. Instead, they called Margaret. "We'd like your opinion." She laughed. "My opinion?" The commissioner smiled. "You've changed ours." Soon neighboring farmers visited every growing season. Some came for ducks. Others came for rice. Many simply came to watch. Nobody laughed anymore. Instead, they carried notebooks. The old flooded property became one of the state's demonstration farms for regenerative rice production. School children visited every spring. One little girl watched hundreds of ducks weaving between young rice plants. She tugged on Margaret's sleeve. "Are the ducks working?" Margaret smiled. "They've been working since sunrise. They don't look busy. They make hard work look easy." The girl nodded thoughtfully. "I wish homework worked like that." Margaret laughed. "So do I." One quiet autumn evening, after another successful harvest, Margaret stood on the highest levee overlooking the paddies. The setting sun reflected across acres of calm water. Hundreds of ducks settled for the evening. Freshly harvested rice fields glowed gold beneath the fading light. She remembered auction day. Everyone had seen 64 flooded acres nobody wanted. They saw standing water, mud, mosquitoes, failed drainage, worthless farmland. Margaret saw water that refused to leave. Instead of forcing it somewhere else, she simply asked what belonged there. The answer had been waiting for generations. Ducks, rice, patience. She never tried to conquer the flood. She gave it a purpose. By the 5th harvest, the former county disaster had become the valley's finest rice farm. Visitors admired the ducks. Chefs praised the rice. Researchers studied the soil. But Margaret always smiled at the same thought. The land had never been broken. It had only been waiting for someone willing to stop fighting the water long enough to understand what it had been trying to say all along.